screen. There's no any problem from that. Well, now we are online. Good evening, good morning to those who are in another countries that are watching us in our channel. We are in our second day of our symposium and sixth session of today. Who's talking about the banking systems, and I'm giving the speech to the chair of this session, our Dr. Parliament Ivanov. You have the speech, sir. I'm so sorry for the pronunciation of your name. I'm so sorry.
All right. You haven't heard English people pronounce my surname, so it's all fine. No worries. Thank you very much, first of all, for organizing this wonderful event and listening to all those wonderful keynote speeches, and also to all participants before us and after our session. In today's session, we shall be discussing the banking system. First, I will be presenting a paper together with Professor Richard Werner, who unfortunately cannot make today's session, and I'll be talking about the currency and the banking school. Following my session, we will have Dr. Laura Merling from the Bucharest University of Economic Studies, who would be talking about the market fundamentalism at the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Following this, we shall have Professor Yunus Özkan from the Istanbul Commercial University, talking about interest rates and exchange rates in the Turkish economy. And finally, we shall have Şükrü Uğurbaylı and Veklau Gündüz from the Akdeniz Kapsas University and Bahçeşehir Kıbrıs University, who will be talking about the commercial bank service quality on customer satisfaction in northern Cyprus. Okay, so let me briefly start with my session, and I shall try to present it within 15 minutes, and I hope everyone subsequent to me will do the same. So in today's presentation, I should be discussing a new integrationist paradigm of the long-standing currency and banking school debate. And this paper, as I mentioned earlier, was prepared by myself and Professor Richard Werner. So first of all, I will outline the most recent rethinking of money banking and credit in the shadow of the global financial crisis, but equally this line of thought is relevant in the COVID times that we are under now. Following this, I will outline some of the key arguments by those two schools of economic thought, the currency and the banking school. And following this, I will put forward an integrated version of the currency and banking school propositions, because this debate, which has been going on for more than 200 years now, has produced little to no financial stability in our system. And then I shall briefly talk about how we can apply this theory into practice and how actually this is done in a leading real-world financial system. And then I shall conclude. So in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, several events happened concurrently. Money was recognized as a very important variable in macroeconomic analysis, because this was a miss prior to this in new Keynesian DSG models. And along with this, commercial bank credit was recognized as a fundamental driver in financial instability, particularly the deviation of money creation into financial activities rather than lending to the real economy. Equally with this, some central banks started recognizing that commercial banks are actually the suppliers of the money supply, and they create new deposits in the process of lending, which is nothing new to any post-Keynesian thinker or even institutionalist or other heterodox thinker. So the combination of those three items above usually leads to a currency and banking debate. And the period subsequent to the global financial crisis is no exception. But how often does this debate happen? Actually, it's more often than you think. Celgin actually goes as far back as the mid-19th century Spain in the School of Salamanca to recognize proponents of each school of thought. And here, based on our reading of the history of economic thought, what we observed with Professor Werner and I is 4 steps, and they're usually in the same, well, they're always in the same succession. You get a financial crisis, then you get a currency banking school debate, which is followed by a delegation of more and more central bank powers, which is resulting in a financial engineering by the private commercial banking sector, which leads again to financial instability. And the whole debate happens again. But throughout this debate, what we can also observe is that actually we get central banks with more and more powers. And actually all of these powers are quite transparent of what they've accumulated as powers over the last couple of centuries. Through their discount rates, through their provision of central bank money exclusively, and so on. But equally, these central bank powers come with a shortcoming, so to speak, that we're moving away from a commodity-based financial system to a purely fiat-based system, which leads to more financialization, but equally more and more financial instability. As a string in the history of economic crisis shows, each subsequent financial crisis is greater from the previous, and this can be mapped out on this graph quite nicely as well. So we're not going to go as far back as mid-15th century Spain to engage with our analysis of the currency school and their proposals. We start off with David Ricardo and his proposal for the plan for the establishment of a national bank in 1824, because quite often 21st century currency school proponents start off their analysis with this. So we wanted to go along with the way. So what David Ricardo recognized in his paper was that commercial banks are the suppliers of the money supply. Okay, that they create paper notes in the process of lending, and then this has fundamental impact on the economy as a whole. And what he proposed was that the Bank of England, at the time a private shareholder bank with a short-term profit maximization mandate, that it should be nationalized, and it should be delegated the money creation privilege to a credit committee at the helm of the Central Bank of England. And equally, with this delegation to the money creation privilege, he also advanced the idea that commercial banks should be stripped of the privilege to create paper notes, and they should be reduced to basically warehouses where you can go and store your money, and they would not be able to lend more money than they actually possess. And equally, he also advanced the idea that the banking sector, to ensure more stability, needs to be regionalized. Okay, and his plan, even though he was drawn in 1824, was partially implemented with the Bank Charter Act when the Bank of England was delegated, exclusive rights on the paper note issuance in the United Kingdom. However, the first part of his suggestion was disregarded. The bank was not nationalized until 1946. Okay, so the Bank of England was delegated this right, which subsequently resulted in the private bankers engaging in financial engineering, and they started leveraging up the money supply through book money, or inside money as it's known in amongst post-Keynesians. Then this, as we all know, led to financial instability and the great crash of 1929. And subsequent to this financial crisis, we get Fisher and the Chicago School of Economics, which proposed money creation again to be delegated to the central banks. and other deposit takers should be reduced to financial intermediaries. And later on, about a century later, Jaromir Benesch and Michael Kumhoff from the IMF at the time at the IMF tested the viability of a full reserve banking system, and unsurprisingly, they found that all of the assumptions, all of the benefits that are outlined by currency school proponents hold. But this is barely surprising because DSG modeling, doesn't take into account financial frictions and so on. And in the words of a Nobel Prize winner, Joseph Stiglitz, in 2018, he dismissed econometrics, macroeconometrics, as a viable tool to study the economy and propose any policy recommendations because it has been reduced to curve-fitting exercise. Okay, and I'm not going to go into great details. Following the global financial crisis, again, the same debate happened. Financial instability due to the asset-backed securities, the global financial crisis, and then there are a number of calls to abolish credit creating banks and delegate the money creation function to central bankers. So, summarizing the 3 centuries of currency school economic thought, the good are the central banks, characterized by the Bank of England, and the bad are the high street commercial banks. And actually, even during today's times, during COVID, we can see again a spin-off of this currency school thinking. We can see Yanis Varoufakis on Twitter advocating why should the Bank of England go and compete against the commercial banks by offering free accounts to retail customers. And of course, the Bank of England is soon to follow, and they want to seize the opportunities from digital finance, as we can understand from a recent speech by Andy Haldane earlier this year, actually a couple of weeks ago. And essentially, the 3 centuries of economic thought in this school of thought can be boiled down to: we need just the central bank to create the money, because this is the only way for us to ensure both economic growth and financial stability. However, this has been very well disputed by the banking school, and even though they're more practical and less theoretical, Charles Goodhart, the former chief economist of the Bank of England, along with a colleague of his, Meinhard Jensen, they summarize quite well what's going on in the real world. So even if the currency school makes some benefits over the short term, the banking school may lose a few battles, but they usually win the war. And that's why we get new and more severe financial crises all the time, because the legal framework within which central banks operate and they try to impose those restrictions is imperfect, and there is always ingenious ways for private bankers to leverage the money supply. However, according to the banking school, key considerations should be the elasticity of the credit supply, and essentially that we should have a decentralized monetary system able to respond to the entrepreneurial animal spirits, because when enterprises need money, they need it on the spot. They cannot wait for a credit committee of 6 at the central bank to decide on how much money are going to go in a particular sector, because the demands from entrepreneurs is varying, and we need this decentralized, close relationship between the banker and the entrepreneur. And essentially what all of those scholars propose is that we can enhance financial stability and economic growth by lending to the real industry, so that we don't have this deviation from credit to GDP. And in the extreme case of the banking school, we have the Austrian School of Economics, whereby they see the need for many private banks, and we need to abolish the central banks. So what are the key proposals of the 2 schools? Well, that money creation is a public privilege, according to currency school proponents, and banking school. What they argue is that such a Soviet-style system is unlikely to result in anything good. So they argue that a decentralized system lending to the real economy, as and when required, is best fitted to deliver economic growth and financial stability. But can we actually integrate those two schools of thought? Actually, what we argue is yes, because we can have a currency school where money sovereignty is in the hands of the public, but equally it is decentralized and elastic as banking school proponents advance. And what we argue for is a community banking system where these are owned mutually by the people, by the local people, so that there is accountability between the shareholders, so to speak, of those community banks and the senior management teams of the local monetary system. And let's apply this theory to practice. More than 200 years of successful banking leading to a stable and prosperous economy. Can you guess which country is this? Which capitalist country is this based on such a system? Actually, it is the savings and cooperative banks, the Volksbanken in Germany, which are operating upon those principles, and more than 70% of banking activities are conducted precisely through such community banks. So the cooperative and savings banks in Germany are owned by their members and public institutions respectively, and we collectively refer to them as community banks. And they operate on the regional principle, the local deposit circulating the local economy, which is very similar to the other suggestion by David Ricardo. Okay, and how do they help economic growth in Germany? Well, they emphasize on relationship lending and transactional lending. And actually, a fair amount of surveys that we quote in our paper are emphasizing on the importance of the proximity between the banker and the entrepreneur. And they don't rely on the transactional lending methods based on data and credit scoring, which are adopted by particularly English commercial banks on the high street. So these type of institutions, the community banks, they emphasize on SME lending, and this is reflected in the data that we've collected over the last 50 years or so. So as you can see, during a downturn of the economy, they extend their lending compared to mega banks, the big commercial banks in Germany. So as you can see in this graph, we have in blue the mega banks, and then all of the rest is various types of community banks, and all of them extend and expand their asset portfolio following a global financial crisis. And as I told you, they're a preferred partner to SMEs, but equally they play a very important role in SME funding. So they also help with the internationalization of SMEs through their connections, introduction between the different boards of SMEs, because they know their financial data and they know what they're doing. So they introduce SMEs to each other in order to maximize the productivity of the economy as well. And actually this coordination role of community banks has resulted that those 1,500 community banks in Germany have led to about 1,500 hidden champions amongst the SMEs in global markets. So more than 1,500 SMEs in Germany are world leaders in their particular market. And what about the balance sheet strength of those community banks in Germany and their financial stability? A string of research has shown that they have very stable earnings over the business cycle, and actually even more stable than commercial banks, which is pro-cyclical. And they have very strong capitalization, even under a stress test. Actually, the BaFin, the German regulator, now run a stress test under COVID-19, and they concluded that the savings banks in Germany are sufficiently capitalized. And as I told you earlier, they can act as an anti-cyclical buffer embedded within the financial system, so that they continue to enhance the stability of the financial system, even during downturns when commercial banks withdraw lending from the real economy. However, there is some indications that inner competition hinders their strength and resilience. Particularly, there is such research on the Spanish and Italian markets, where European Union deregulation policies have led to the collapse of and the consolidation of a number of cooperative and savings banks. So in conclusion, the third wave of the currency and banking school debate brings little to no new insights. And we are trying to integrate the two schools of economic thought, and we try to apply our line of thinking against a real world system which supports SME lending and the real economy, and which can promote green economic growth, as Professor Malcolm Sawyer mentioned yesterday in his speech. And the system that we advance instills financial stability due to the balance sheet strength and anti-cyclical lending, and equally with this resolves the too big to fail problem, which I have not touched upon due to a time constraint. So thank you very much, and these are my contact details. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Plama.
Thank you very much, Yunus. Let's next move on to Ms. Lara Merling from the Bucharest University of Economic Studies, who would be talking to us about market fundamentalism at the World Bank and IMF.
Hi, 1 second.
Before you start, Lara, do you want me to give you a heads up when you have 5 minutes left?
Yes, that would
Okay,
be great.
sure.
Okay, and let's see, hopefully. Okay. Is this? Just 1 second. Is this working properly? Okay. So my presentation today is about market fundamentalism at IMF and World Bank, and I'm going to go a little bit over how these institutions adopted that ideology and kind of what they were supposed to do when they were created versus what they ended up doing, and then what they are claiming that they are doing to this day. So for international financial institutions, the main ones are the World Bank and the IMF. And the World Bank initially was created to finance infrastructure projects in post-World War II Europe. It has a couple of different arms. It has the World Bank, which is public sector, and then the International Financial Corporation, it's a private sector arm. And then since the 70s, when it was no longer needed to finance infrastructure, it started going into healthcare, education, and more general policy advice. And then the IMF was also a result of the Bretton Woods conference. And here I have some of the quotes from its articles of agreement on what it's supposed to be doing. And it says things like promote high employment and sustainable economic growth, reduce poverty around the world. It explicitly says that it has to support balance of payment stability without resorting to measures destructive of national or international prosperity. However, in the way they were created and set up, even though they are part of the UN system, they have a very different governance structure where shares and voting power are allocated according to the capital countries put in, which effectively means that rich countries control the institutions and make all the decisions and have all the power. And for major decisions, if you have above 15% of the shares, you can veto anything. And the US has that power on its own. So it's part of that structure that made it very easy for the US to completely take over these institutions. And there's been very good sociology research done on this topic by Sarah Babb and Alex Kintikilakis that did a couple of papers because they actually got their hands on the archives from the Reagan administration and how explicitly they decided to, bring trickle-down economics to the rest of the world. And had this whole plan on how to do it without doing it quietly was the idea. So there was no official change in the articles of agreements or the purpose. They simply shifted the way they operated and convinced other rich countries to go along, which wasn't very hard. And that's how we have, structural adjustment programs that start and all of a sudden have all these conditions on loans and everything else. Then next I have a little caricature on kind of how this reflects itself, and it's kind of a new iteration of colonialism that instead of just claiming the land, it's kind of now all these things are in the name of economic growth. And then what we can see is kind of how from the role, especially for the IMF, of stabilization, it changed its mission to just market-led growth and doing that through structural adjustment and conditionality. And here on the right, it's an image actually from an IMF research paper, a working paper. It's a very nice paper that documents the shift in growth narratives at the IMF and the words and terms that keep appearing in documents. And it shows, very clearly we can identify like 1980s, late 1980s, the explosion in talks about privatization, privatize, liberalization, and the fall of discussions on other topics. So this Washington consensus was just simply the extension of neoclassical supply side economics to development, and then bringing this idea that free flows of goods and capitals are the path to development because rich countries have capital, developing countries need capital, and that's going to solve everything. And that these institutions should just be responsible to create free markets. And it was all designed in the sense that programs were supposed to make countries attractive to foreign investors, and that's how they would develop. And the timing worked out great too, because it was at a time where a lot of developing countries had a lot of dollar debts they couldn't pay. And it was a lot of that had to do with US interest rate policies, and it was not really the fault of those countries, but they were in a situation where even with the strings attached, they had to take the money. And then a very good other example of where the IMF implemented its policies is in transition economies in Eastern Europe in the 1990s. I'll get to that in a little bit on how all the countries there had IMF programs. And this, for time, I won't really go over like all the points of it was established, what does Washington Consensus mean? And it's the idea of austerity and liberalize and privatize everything. And it's kind of this like 10 points of how that means. And a lot of it is also making sure there's no control on capital inflows and outflows. no regulations, privatizing everything, and only just strong security on property rights. And then in the way this was implemented, here's another nice drawing of if the IMF were a doctor. And the idea is that you have, if the IMF were a doctor, for every sick patient that came, no matter if they, have a cough, broke a bone, or whatever they did, the treatment is always exactly the same. And then this is kind of, if we want to look a little bit of at the results of this package in Eastern Europe, and that's a good region to look at because everyone had programs. The economies in communist times had, fairly low unemployment and poverty. They were already industrialized. And then for all of the countries, the results of these programs were pretty bad. But yeah, if we see, it's like, here is the list of countries, and green is when they did not have a program. And we can see that except for Slovenia, everyone had a program at some point. And some of them, a lot of programs at many different points. And then to go a little bit, in this context, this is another spot the difference. And what's different in this image and the other one? And the answer is nothing is different. It's just the same place after 10 years of IMF structural adjustment. But then that image is actually very nice and optimistic, because if we look at Eastern Europe after 10 years of IMF adjustment, we see this column here is the output ratio in 89 and 99. And we see that actually being the same after 10 years as the lucky countries, and the unlucky countries, some of them, like Georgia, for example, their economy was only 31% as big in 99 as it was in 89. And along with this huge contractions in most places, there was also huge inflation, which of course came with very high social costs in terms of both income inequality. So this is where the Gini was by 88, and then the red is how it increases from 93 to 95. And then in terms of poverty, that one looks even worse. And we see the red is the increase where poverty was in 1998 for these countries. And more or less the only countries that did slightly better were the ones closest to Western Europe that immediately joined the EU. So Poland, Hungary. And then if we look for kind of the results globally in that height of structural adjustment period. So this is from a paper that looked at economic per capita growth in countries from the 60s to the 80s, then 80 to 2000, 2000 to 2015. And it shows that for all country groups and income levels, but especially the developing countries, the growth performance from 1980 to 2000 was very, very bad. This is that period. And then it recovered a lot in some places from 2000 to 2015. And that's when a lot of countries and emerging markets stepped away from the IMF.
5 minutes, Laura.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so I'm gonna, so I guess the conclusion is that these structural adjustment programs did not work very well. No one developed using that. All the countries that developed use industrial policy or other methods. So there's not really a lot of evidence that that works. And in the early 2000s, the IMF itself had a lot of pressure and the World Bank on changing something about this policies, and there were a lot of protests, and countries stepped away. And then, the financial crisis made the IMF relevant again. And some of the reforms that happened, we'll go over, it's mostly symbolic. And then kind of this narrative that comes to this day is what Jason Hickel called the optimism industry, where it kind of shows how this type of neoliberal policies supposedly reduced poverty and we made so much progress. But what these kind of graphs don't show is that most of the progress happened in China, and then China and India too, before India turned to neoliberal policies. And China is a state-led model of growth. So it actually doesn't support the point that these policies work. And then what we have here is, in 2014, when Christine Lagarde, who's the IMF head at the time, was asked about structural adjustment, she gave this quote that was structural adjustment that was before my time. I have no idea what it is. We don't do that anymore. But do they not do that? Because the new IMF is just like the old IMF. And they've changed how they talk, they changed the research they do. But if we look at their program, and I just chose here an example that's very concrete and to the point of this paper that just looked at all the programs for 1 year at the IMF and found that, out of the 26 programs, 23 out of them had procyclical austerity measures, 15 were asked to replace universal social protection with targeted programs. A lot of them had conditions on regressive taxation, and a lot of them were asked to reduce their public wage bill. And then even just according to the IMF, this is from their review of program design and conditionality, they do admit they overestimate the impact on growth of their structural reforms and underestimate the negative impact of austerity, and how only a third of their programs, by their own definition of success, succeeded. But they still do the same thing. And then the same with the World Bank. The World Bank is a little bit more complicated because they have a lot of different arms that do different things. But even though they now talk about climate or gender inequality, they still arrive to all of their policy proposals to a supply side framework. And the changes are mostly symbolic. For example, privatizing things outright is not in fashion anymore, but now it's all about public-private partnerships, which is just an iteration of the same thing. And same as their big response to the Sustainable Development Goals was an initiative called Maximizing Finance for Development that was also all about how do you attract private finance and make them pay for everything. But in reality, it's mostly about protecting their profits and de-risking the investments. And then kind of that's the sorry, I'm almost done. That fundamentally nothing has changed, and it's the same, despite all the flashy PR, the World Bank and IMF are the same institutions that operate under the same market fundamentalism that was introduced as a political thing, and it persists there even now, though now they say it's evidence-based policy and they don't recognize this political history. And all the shifts and mitigation, it's all about how to correct market failures or things like that without questioning the overall framework. And what we see in their COVID response too is that the World Bank has committed a lot of money, but it seems like it wants to do more policy loans. We don't know what that's going to look like. And then for the IMF, that they said they committed 100 billion, but actually they've only given about 30 billion in emergency loans without conditions. And the expectation here too is that they will try and do most of their financing in regular programs with the same conditionality and the same kind of structural reforms, austerity that we've always seen. And that's also where, the press seems to play along. And during the annual meeting, they said it's the week austerity died because they read IMF research materials. but they're not in line with like IMF country advice and what they're actually doing in programs. And then other documents also indicate that structural reforms are still on the agenda. And then this I don't have to get into right now. It's kind of, can we do anything? And UNCTAD had a proposal on how to reform these institutions, but it's really more of a political economy and political will kind of thing. It's not about, you know, economics or something that institutions can do on their own. Okay. And thank you.
Thank you very much for a really interesting research out there. I hope there are some questions later on. Let's move on to our next presenter, Professor Yunus Özkan from the Istanbul Commercial University, who will be talking about interest rates and exchange rates in the Turkish economy.
Thank you, Plama. You can see the screen, right?
Yes, yeah. Thank you very much, Professor.
Firstly, I would like to thank you for your participation in this session. And I would like to also thank you for every single person involving this organization from the bottom to the highest. I don't know who is responsible. I think it was a great honor to be with you. In this section, I am going to talk about interest rate and the exchange rate in Turkish economy. For the outline, I am going to give a very little introduction, and then I will provide information about the exchange rate, and then I will give information or developments about the inflation, interest rate, and the intervention interest in exchange rates. And then I will try to explain why, even if the central bank or the Turkish economy try to increase interest rate, they cannot control the exchange rate. Based on these titles, like foreign trade and current account balance, foreign direct investment, gross net external debt, central bank reserve requirement ratios, deposit and remuneration. Firstly, governments may sometimes want to devalue their currencies. A depreciation in the value of the local currency makes export cheaper, import more expensive, and can stimulate domestic demand. If the economy is stuck in recession and rising employment, lowering a currency value can help boost economic growth and provide new job opportunities. There are several policies the government can adopt to reduce the value of the currency: lowering interest rate with a looser monetary policy, or lowering taxes and increasing government spending with a looser fiscal policy. If the loose monetary policy is selected as a policy in Turkey, in this case, the value of the Turkish lira will fall, and along with the decrease in interest rates. When the value of the Turkish lira falls, the current account deficit will decrease due to the reduction in the foreign trade deficit. Foreign buyers will increase their demand for Turkish goods, which become cheaper in international markets when the Turkish lira depreciates. These upward price movements therefore increase inflation, especially increase in energy input prices due to exchange rate, have a negative impact on the national economy. When we look at the figures on the imported goods in Turkish economy, a large part is depending on the energy. In order to prevent this rapid increase in exchange rate, the central bank tries to make measures by using the monetary policy tools. The most important objective of the Central Bank of the Republic of Turkey, as in all other countries, is to maintain price stability. In this regard, the most common monetary policy tools used are required reserve, open market operation, and interest rate. In the study, developments in the exchange rate as a result of the monetary policy implemented by the Central Bank of the Republic of Turkey analyzed. Firstly, I would like to show you the exchange rate in terms of the United States dollar and the euro against the Turkish lira, or the TRY. As you can see here, from the 2008 to the 2020, up to date this data, and there is a steady state increase in the exchange rate. When we look at for the shorter time period, in order to see the movements clearly, as you see that there is an increase, especially in 2018, there was a peak in the exchange rate. And when we look at about last 2 years, you can see these movements. There is always increase. I mean, there's a tendency of increase in the exchange rate. When we look at the inflation, the dashed lines represent the inflation. As you see that there is a effects on the inflation, this high exchange rate, okay? And then when we look at after 2018, especially after September, there is a decrease in the inflation rate since the last years, or the 2018, the October. There is a steady state for the inflation rate, but as a result of this increase in the exchange rate, we are going to have the inflation. I mean, the price are going to be higher. As a result of that, we will unfortunately face the high inflation. For the interest rate, I would like to provide the information. In Turkey, the CBRT, Central Bank of the Republic of Turkey, use as a policy rate the 1-week repo in the percentage term. As you look at in the table from the 2010 to 2020, it was 7%, and it was the lowest one at the middle of 2013. I mean, the 4.50%, the landing is interest rate. After that, there is an increase, and then, especially in 2018, as you see here, in order to eliminate this negative effect in the exchange rate, I mean, there was a huge increase in the value of the foreign currency. The central bank tried to increase the policy rate, but unfortunately, it didn't work. You can see in here the intervention from 4.50 to 10 point in order to stop this increase in the foreign exchange. In here, I am using the US dollar against the Turkish lira in order to show the exchange rate. And then as you see that from 2013 to 2018, the policy rate almost the same. But after that, in 2018, there was a huge increase in the exchange rate. And then 2 times in a very shorter time, the Central Bank of the Republic of Turkey had to increase 2 times in a very shorter time in order to decrease this exchange rate. As you see that, even if they are increasing from 8% to 24%, unfortunately, they cannot stop the increase in the exchange rate. Okay, and then there was a decreasing period in the policy rate, and lately there was an increase in the policy rate. Couple of days ago, we have increased the policy rate to do 15% from 10.25%. As you see that there is still the exchange rate increasing, and even if we are increasing our policy rate, unfortunately it didn't work. I mean, in order to control the exchange rate. Why increasing interest rate cannot decrease the value of the exchange rate? I will try to explain why. First, the foreign trade. As you see that, I am providing information for the last 3 years, and then for the January-September period for the 2020. As you see that, unfortunately, we are having always the trade deficit. As a result of that, we are having the current account balance or current account deficit, largely coming from this trade deficit. And then for the first 10 months of this year, when we look at the export and imports increase, even if our currency is devaluing, I mean, the Turkish goods are becoming cheaper. Unfortunately, because of the coronavirus, we didn't use this positive atmosphere in order to increase our exports. But for the last 1 or 2 months, we are increasing our exports, and it is going to be beneficial for the balance of payments or the current account deficit. When we look at the current account balance, last year we had a positive about 8.5 billion. But before that, we have always a current account deficit. And for the 2020, I mean the January to the September, we are still having the current account deficit. It means that while we are having the current account deficit or the trade deficit, it is not easy to control the exchange rate by just increasing interest rate or the policy interest rate. When we look at the policy foreign direct investment, there is also negative sign. As you see that last year, we had only 8.7 billion US dollar from abroad. And as you see that there is when you look at 2 years from 2018 to 2019, there was a very huge decrease in this foreign direct investment. And unfortunately, for this year, maybe we are not going to have enough foreign direct investment. It is also a reason why we cannot fight against this high foreign exchange, because this foreign direct investment is very important in order to increase the exchange rate stock in the Turkish economy. And unfortunately, we cannot benefit adequately from foreign direct investment. I mean, at least for the last year and according to this year. When we look at the gross external debt stock for Turkish economy, I'm going to look at for the 2020 quarter 2. As you see that for the public sector, the short and long-term debt is more than 160 billion US dollar. For the Central Bank of the Republic of Turkey, it is about 20 billion. And for the private sector, it is very huge compared to the public sector. It is 238.9 billion US dollar. When you are summing up, we can have 421 billion US dollar, and it is the more than half of our GDP. One more time, it makes very difficult for the Turkish economy to control the exchange rate. As you see that these loans are getting from abroad, and we have to pay in foreign currency, and it makes difficult for the monetary authority to control the exchange rate. When we look at the net external debt stock, it is still high. I mean, for the net external debt stock of Turkish economy, it is more than 30% of the GDP.
3 minutes, Professor.
Thank you. For the central bank reserves, when we look at for the last years, unfortunately, because of this high exchange rate, we are, in order to control the price of the exchange rate, we try to intervene in the market, but we cannot do that. And meanwhile, we are decreasing our reserves for the 2020 September. It is about 80 billion US dollar foreign currency plus gold. When we look at the reserve and the exchange rates are increasing. Our reserves are, when we look at the reserve, slightly decreasing in the total amount of the reserve. For the reserve requirement ratio, you can see here. As you see that the government tried to support the Turkish lira in the Turkish banking system. Because of that, the reserve requirement ratio is very low compared to the other years. In order to fight one more time against the high exchange rate, unfortunately, in Turkish economy, we are having a very big problem for the dollarization. About half of the total deposit is in foreign currency. Okay. As a result of that, by using the monetary policy, tool, I mean the reserve requirement ratio. The central bank tried to favor the Turkish lira by decreasing the reserve requirement ratio, and for the foreign currency, as you see that they are increasing the reserve requirement ratios. They are the last numbers, about 20 or more than 20% for foreign currency. For Turkish, it is about for the same time maturities, about 2 or 1%. They are the foreign currency deposit. As you see that there is an increase when we look at altogether with the foreign exchange rate and the foreign currency deposit in Turkish lira. Unfortunately, even if there is an increase in the foreign currency, Turkish investors increase their part in the banking sectors in terms of the foreign currency. I mean, they prefer to invest in the foreign currency. Lastly, I would like to talk about the remuneration. As you see that for the remuneration rates and commission rates applied to the required reserve in the foreign exchange, there are 0 rate for the required reserve in US dollar and in euro, and there is still the 0 in the participation fund US dollar, and there are very slight rate for the participation funds in currency other than the United States dollar. As you see that they try to do not support the foreign currency, and they try by implementing this kind of policy, they try to control the monetary policy in terms of the exchange rate. It is not easy, as you see that we are very vulnerable to this kind of foreign exchange shocks, and unfortunately in a short time it is not easy to manage the this development in the foreign currency, and we are going to try to do our best in order to fight against this dollarization programs. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Professor Uskan. Really interesting topic and research. And next we turn to Professor Sukru and Professor Veklar Gündüz, who will be talking to us about commercial banks' service quality on customer satisfaction perception in Northern Cyprus.
Yes, thank you all, and thanks for the distinguished presentations. And I will share my screen. Yes, I think that you can all see. Yep. And we just present our commercial bank service quality on customer satisfaction perception in Northern Cyprus with my friend. Shukri is from University of Mediterranean Carpathia, a business administration department, and I am the banking and finance department head in Bahçeşehir Cyprus University. And let us just have a start. And sorry for that. Yes. We have the abstract, importance of the research, question of the study, literature review. We work on the circle model. We will show you the research method, research model, and the circle dimensions, the scale, and the conclusion. So the current market conditions in the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, the bank's transaction volumes, product features, management, customer portfolios, their importance depending on customer satisfaction, the policies that the bank should follow, the technology investments, and the establishment of the strategies and structures were analyzed under this study with the observations and the investigations. So what is the importance of our research? As you know, after the pandemic situation, also after COVID-19, the developing technology is very important for the banks as well. So the speed and the globalization brought by technology, the ability to adopt the changes and flexibility have resulted in an intense competitive environment for businesses, especially for the banks. The developing technology, the speed and the globalization, is important for here. The measuring effects of disputes arising from the quality of the services provided in the banking sector, and consequently the perceived service quality of the customer on the service quality based on the questionnaire, based on the circle method, and the extent to which the results will approach the bank service quality according to the expected and perceived service by the customer, and what together with them. It has been investigated by researchers that the style problem can arise, and in addition to the questions of the circle quality of service model, other research questions also were added to make the information more reliable. So what is our question for this study? This study includes analyzing and evaluating the service quality perception and customer satisfaction perception empirically with the circle method in private banks operating in TRNZ during the pandemic process. The perceived service quality of the customer based on the expected service and its quality analyzed with the questionnaire based on the circle method. So there's a gap between the quality and the service provided and the perception of customer satisfaction, and how to eliminate it has been the subject of research for years. There's a gap, so gap model and service quality taking into account the service providers and beneficiaries, as well as between the quality perceptions and practices of the banks providing services, and gaps between what customers expect from the service and the real service they benefit from, and how these gaps affect the perceived service quality. So maybe we can just have a quick look for the circle model. This is the source is Parasuraman et al. And there are some gaps between the consumer and the marketer. So during the years for the researchers, these gaps are analyzed, but especially the gap 5, that is expected services and the perceived service. We couldn't find lots of works on this gap, and for the Northern Cyprus, it is the first first study that we have tried to analyze this gap between my friend Shukri, because as we also work as a bankers, we can also have a relation with the customers, and then we can easily see what are the expected services and what did they get at the end. And for this model, the gap 5, as we said, Parasuran, Zetam, and Berry pointed out that the 4 gaps briefly described about the main reasons that form the 5th gap, that forms the basis of the circle model. When this gap is positive, that is when the perceived service is equal to or exceeds the expected service, quality can be mentioned. If the perceived service is below expectations, it leads to poor quality. So for our research model, we just have 2 hypotheses. There is no significant difference between the expectation and perception levels of customers in the bank regarding service quality. And the other hypothesis is a null hypothesis. There is a significant difference between the expectations and the perception levels of customers in the bank regarding service quality. So for our conceptual framework, we just have 2 independent variables, expected service and the perceived service, and the dependent variable is the service quality for our study. And the circle dimensions are just have 5 main dimensions. The first one is the tangibles, appearance of physical facilities, equipment, personal and communication materials, reliability, ability to perform the promised service dependently and accurately, responsiveness, willingness to help customers and provide prompt service, assurance, the knowledge and courtesy of employees and their ability to convey trust and confidence, empathy, caring, individualized attention the firm provides its customers. So what we have done for using the circle scale, we have 22 questions were used to measure the service quality of the service provided at banks. These questions were scored by evaluating the 5-point Likert scale. It was conducted as 2 separate surveys as perceived service and expected service. Then by analyzing the factors, the dimensions were calculated and it was tested in various statistical analyses by measuring its consistency and significance. 22 questions were used to measure the service quality of the services provided at banks. They were scored by evaluating the 5-point Likert scale. It was conducted as 2 separate surveys as perceived and expected services. Then by analyzing the factors, the dimensions were calculated and it was tested in various statistical analyses by measuring the consistency and the significance. And we will directly give the conclusion as we have the limited time. The changes in customers' attitudes and behaviors from service marketing and increasing competition have highlighted the quality factor in many businesses. In this competitive environment, defining, measuring, and evaluating service quality will gain great importance. Satisfaction of products and services in meeting needs is taken into consideration in meeting human needs. As long as the product and service are good service and the result of the development of banking services and their spread to a wide base, banks are not only considered as institutions operating in the field of finance, but as a service sector institution. In this respect, competitive advantage can be achieved and survive in the long run with the right strategies and practices aimed at acquiring, protecting, and increasing the number of loyal customers in banking within the service sector. Undoubtedly, the priorities in these strategies are based on the correct determination of customer demands and expectations. For last words, I want to just give some details about the limitations also. As our research is continuing for now, we have done this for one of the local banks. So in Northern Cyprus, we have 21 banks. So we will spread our research and then have exactly for the results for the whole of the sector. So that was just for the beginning. So we will give more details in the next conferences or the Congress, I think. So thank you for listening to us.
And I add for little knowledge for the presentation. There are 21 banks in the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. 2 of these banks are public banks, and there are 14 private capital banks and 5 more Turkish branch banks. The 5th gap model of the circle model has been examined, and the most important part is examined or our article, especially the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, such as a study has been carried out for the first time with this modeling. It's a great importance for banks' balance sheet and their profitability. Today, it's understood that this service concept is very important in our country and as in the whole world. Banks will be able to cover the necessary deficiencies and precautions by taking advantage of these results and suggestions by providing resources from this work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, professors. A really interesting research. Have we got any questions from YouTube? I'm on the channel, but I don't think that we have any questions there, but maybe Faisal can correct me.
Well, that's true. We didn't receive any question for right now.
Okay, and do you have any questions in between us presenters?
For me, no, thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much for everyone who participated in today's session. Really great papers, and I look forward to reading them as published papers in the distant future.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.